Our next speaker is Barry Richards. Barry is a fourth generation beekeeper. He is also the webmaster for our Nashville Area Beekeepers Association. So please welcome Barry. He'll tell you about how to get your bees.
How y'all doing? I really like that we're working from the book. This Beekeeping in Tennessee book is really handy. It's been revised over the years. Dr. John Skinner, who will be here tomorrow afternoon, is really the mastermind behind the current edition of this, but it's been around for decades, even before Dr. Skinner was here. And so the part that I'm talking about starts on page 25, and we don't really teach from the book, but I like you to know that the stuff's in there. And I won't cover every little point, and you may hear me say something that's a little different than what's in the book, and the same goes for all the beekeepers you hear speak, because if you have 10 beekeepers in a room and you ask their opinion of something, you'll get 11 answers. That's the way beekeepers are. My part is about how to get your bees. Trevor's talked about getting equipment. I'm going to talk about getting bees. And the book touches on several things. I'm going to talk about 3 of those today. First of all, I tell all new beekeepers, how many hives are you going to have? They ask me, how many should I have? Or if they tell me I'm going to start with 1, you need to know that 2 is greater than 1. I really recommend, if you're a new beekeeper, to consider getting 2 hives. I'm not saying get 5 hives or 10 hives, but get 2 hives rather than 1, because there's so many opportunities when those hives start growing. You may run into issues that if you had another hive there, you could save yourself a lot of trouble. A great example that's been touched on tonight is if you find a hive that's queenless, all you got to do is take eggs, a frame with eggs out of this hive, and put it over here, and they very well may raise a brand new queen for you in great shape. If she goes out and mates, you're back in business. You don't have to spend money to order a queen. You don't have to wait for that queen to come and introduce her into the hive and take all those risks. You can get them started right away. So let me just put that word of encouragement out there for you, and I'm sure you'll hear other beekeepers talk about that. The 3 things that I'm going to cover that are in the book are considering starting with package bees. And we're also going to talk about the possibility that you might want to start with what's called a nuke. Nuke is short for nucleus. Or you might want to catch a swarm of bees. And we'll give you some information on how to do all 3 of those things. Now, if you want to start with package bees, this is an example of a package. And usually when you buy a package like this, you're getting 3 or maybe 4 pounds of bees. What's the book say? How many bees in a pound? I think it's 4,000 is what the book says. That's a good guess anyway. So when you get a 3-pound package, which is pretty typical, you're looking at maybe 12,000 bees coming in this box. And you see this thing dangling in here, that is a queen cage. That's not exactly how they come shipped. This is an example of where Jean bought a queen and got 1 queen through the mail last year. Now, she didn't just come in this envelope. The queen comes in a cage just like this. This is pretty well the standard. You might see some plastic versions of this sort of thing, but this wooden cage is pretty typical. And you'll see in a video I hope to show soon that on one end of the cage there's candy. The queen bee is in here with some attendants, and there's a fondant candy at one end, and when they ship them, they'll put a cork in each end of it. The idea is we're going to pull the cork from the candy end, not the other end. You'll be reminded of that more in the class. And the bees are going to slowly chew through that candy. The workers inside may consume a little bit of it, but mostly the thousands of bees that are in the hive, whether they're in the package that you've bought or whether you're requeening a hive, they're going to chew through the other end. The idea is you're slowly introducing the queen to the colony. The thing to understand about these packages, this isn't a hive unto itself. If you go online, you can find some cool videos of how Wilbanks apiaries, for instance, Hardeman apiaries down in Georgia will raise these bees. They've got hive after hive after hive, big, strong hives that they're raising worker bees in. And then separately, they're raising the queen bees. And once the queen bee is laying eggs and they're confident that she's mated properly, they'll put her in a cage with just a few bees from that colony, and then literally take a funnel and fill this up with 3 or 4 pounds of bees. And then the very last thing they do before they ship it is slip that queen cage in there just for shipping. She's kind of kept warm by those bees, and they'll start interacting with them. But the thing to understand is when you buy a package like this, that queen has never met those worker bees before. So in essence, you are re-queening this group of bees that you got. Now, when this package ships, not only are there a whole bunch of bees in there, there's also going to be a can in there of syrup, sugar syrup, just like Trevor was talking about. It's basically a tin can, a friction can with holes in the top, so that there's a little bit of syrup dripping out, and they're consuming it as they travel. These are shipped on a truck. You can buy, if you buy, somebody was asking earlier, where do I get bees? If you can buy bees locally from Johnson Honey Farm, from John Seaborn, from Jim Murph, who you'll meet, if you can buy bees locally, you're always going to be better off, because shipping bees is really rough. You can get these through the mail. They'll come in the mail. If you do that, you need to go down to the post office and give them a heads up. Make sure they've got your phone number in case it's not on the package, because it's important these bees aren't set out on a dock in the sun, because it'll kill them. And most post offices have encountered this from time to time, and they'll give you a call. As soon as those bees get there, they'll give you a call. And you can go down and pick them up. But really, it's a lot better if you can either get them right from the producer, like if you bought them from Robert Johnson at Johnson's Honey Farm, or if you, for instance, Kelly's up in Clarkson, Kentucky, will have truckloads of these brought in beginning, I think, at the end of March. And you have to get on the list, and I believe you have to pay in advance. But you'll be able to drive to Clarkson, or you might have a neighbor who's going to get some, and you can, save a little bit on gas. But pick them up where they've come right off the truck. So in other words, they've put this package together down in Georgia, say on Thursday afternoon, put them on a truck, shipped them straight to Clarkson, and taken them off that truck so that they're not stressed a lot. Because as you can imagine, if these go through the mail, they're being exposed to a lot of different temperatures, they're going to get pretty stressed, and you're going to end up with a lot of bees that don't make it. So it is a good idea if you can buy them locally. I'm going to take this apart a little bit here, but what I'm going to do is sort of demonstrate how you install a package of bees. A lot of the work you're going to do is going to be done 1, 2, 3. What we're going to do is get a spray bottle of sugar water, spray these bees, wet them down extra good. And I've seen Robert Johnson's late father, Ed Johnson, take it and put it in a 5-gallon bucket full of water, completely submerging those bees, because wetting them down is going to make them kind of sort of stick together, cool them off, so that when you open it up, they don't all just fly up in the air. It'll make it a little bit easier. It's good to do it late in the afternoon. It's late in the afternoon here where we're installing these bees. And then we're going to pry that top off. There's the bees. They're wet. And I've opened up the hive, and I've pulled out several frames to make room for these bees. This is the exciting part. In one fast motion, we're going to thump this on the hive to knock all the bees to the bottom, and then pull the can out. Set it aside. Then we're going to pull the queen cage out, since it's attached in a manner in which I couldn't get it out without removing the cage. And then we're going to pour the bees in the box. That's the part where you would not believe me if I told you you just pour the bees in the box. But seeing it makes it a little more believable. I'm still spraying them a little bit. Again, the idea is just to keep them from flying a lot. I want them to clean themselves with the sugar water, go down in the box, and start working on that comb. Now, the best idea, the best situation is to install these bees on new foundation and let them start building out on it. But if you're in your second year of beekeeping, you might have some drawn out comb that you could put them on. That'll allow the queen to start laying eggs sooner, because you got to realize they're going to have to draw out the comb. They're going to have to make room to store nectar. They're going to have to make room for the queen to lay eggs. Now, in this situation, we need to next hang the queen cage in the hive, and there's several different ways to do that. You can hang the queen cage down. A lot of people will recommend that you don't put the queen cage where the candy end would be down, because the idea being that one of the worker attendants could die and clog up the hole and keep them from escaping. As long as you're going to check them in maybe 2 or 3 days, you may not have to worry about that. Now, one challenge, though, the way I did it here, I can't really put that frame back in there because there's too many bees in the way. So what I ended up doing is leaving one frame out. Here's the close-up of the queen cage. So again, there's candy in one end of it with a cork in both ends. So we don't want to take out the cork on the other end. We take out the cork on the candy end. Again, don't ever forget that. I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories about people forgetting that. And then we take that little nail I'm holding, and I like to sort of drill a hole through that candy, especially if it's really firm. You don't want to make a hole big enough that the queen can just crawl out, but if you give them a starting point, sometimes you'll get candy fondant that's really kind of runny, and there's no real need to do that because you don't want her to be released too quickly. And then in this example that I'm showing you, I just hang the queen cage down between 2 frames, and then I slide them together. You could also push a nail into the soft pine on the end of the cage and let it hang. And then I left a frame out. So I'm wedging it between 2. You could also put it on the bottom board. I think the book mentions that. And what I like to do, especially if I'm putting in a hive with more than one box, is put it between the frames on the second story so it sits right wire side down so the bees can come up. The idea is they need to be able to interact through that screen with the queen so she'll be released properly. Feed. That is the end of every section of this. When you install them from a package, you got to feed them. You got to make sure they've got sugar, especially if you're putting them on foundation. They're going to have to draw out that comb, and the only way they can do it is with sugar. If all the flowers in the world are blooming, they can only go visit them during the day. And if it rains, they can't visit them that day. And a lot of people will tell you they can't visit them the next day if it rains because the nectar literally is washed out of the blossoms. So you feeding those bees is very, very important, regardless of whether it's a package, a swarm, or a nuke. Let's go on to talk about nukes. The pros of nukes are quick buildup. Here's what a nuke is. It's a nucleus hive. You're essentially buying a miniature hive. You'll often be able to buy them in a box like this, or about this size. This box will hold 5 frames, I believe. Yes, this box will hold 5 frames. And if you go to some nuke producers will basically, this is part of the deal. You get this box. Some, you bring your own hive to their location, and they'll take 5 frames or 4 frames, ever how many they're selling you, out of their hive and put it in yours. When we bought or picked up nukes that were donated by Johnson's Honey Farm this year, that's the way we did it. I took a box down there, and he just pulled frames out and put them in my own box, and I carried them off. We took them to the Music City Center and installed them there. So the nice thing about a nuke is it's a proven queen. The queen has overwintered with that hive, and she's laying eggs. And when you pick it up, if you pick it up from somebody local, they'll be able to pull a frame out, and you'll be able to see the brood that queen has laid, and you may even see the queen crawling around. I'll make one note to new beekeepers. If you're given the opportunity to buy a marked queen, go ahead and spend the extra $3 or whatever it costs, because it's worth it to have a marked queen where you can easily find her. If that's not an option, you'll be fine, though. Don't worry too much about it. So with a nuke, though, you're installing this into an existing hive. And the ideal situation, under most circumstances, you wouldn't start with 2 deeps like this. You would want to start with just one. But so I don't have to lean over any more than necessary. We'll do it this way. So you're basically going to start with foundation on either side, and you're going to take your frames with bees and all out of this nuke and put them into your empty hive. And it's that simple. So it's a little less intimidating than a package. You're not shaking bees. You're not having to worry about them flying around very much. Now, you saw me use the sugar spray on that package. When you install that nuke, it's nice to use a smoker. They're going to respond to a smoker because they are a colony. They are defending their hive, and the smoker is going to calm them down. So that's what I'd recommend with a nuke. Now, nukes are more expensive. They might be worth it. They are a little bit harder to get. Of course, you can ship up a truckload of packages from Georgia, but nukes are a little harder to ship. And usually when you buy nukes, they're coming in smaller quantities from wherever they're trucking from. But it is a great way to get started, and they'll build up fast. You know, if you start a package here today, there's going to be several days for that queen to escape, several days for those bees to draw comb. Whereas a nuke, they're already working. They'll go ahead and start drawing out the comb that you've added them to, but they're already doing their thing. There's brood that's hatching the day you get it. And there's not a delay where the queen has to lay eggs, they have to draw comb, she lays eggs, the egg grows and starts hatching. The package that you install in a hive, the population of that hive is actually going to drop after you get it, because bees are just naturally going to die from old age, basically, before the brood that queen starts laying starts hatching out, and then they start their upward climb. The nuke, on the other hand, just continues to grow from the day you get it. All right, let's talk about swarms. The good thing about swarms is they're free. They're very cool to catch, and in many cases, you're providing a community service. The downside of it is you don't know anything about the genetics. You might be getting some mean bees. You might be getting some bees that aren't particularly productive. And you might get some that are, more susceptible to disease or more susceptible to being injured by varroa mites. You might be bringing a disease home. If you catch a lot of swarms, you might consider having a separate swarm yard. In other words, when you bring that swarm to your house, you don't put it right next to that hive that you paid all that money for. You put it maybe down the road so that they can start working and you can observe them and make sure they're healthy before you add them to your bee yard. I haven't had any situations where I've caught a swarm and brought disease to my house. I'm not saying it's common, but it is a possibility. If you get a call to catch a swarm, sometimes you'll hear people say, well, aren't these bees worth money? I hear you'll pay $100 for a package of bees. Well, yeah, but I know where that package comes from, and if there's something wrong with them, I'll get a refund. I don't know what's wrong with these bees I'm catching here, and it may be a waste of my time, and often it's very challenging. Now, I will show a couple little videos about catching swarms just because it's kind of cool. All right, who's been to the Frisch Center for Visual Arts in downtown Nashville? Who's seen the ornamental trees out back? I used to work in downtown Nashville, and they called up and said, hey, we got some bees over here, come look at them. And I said, well, let me bring my videographer with me, and we'll check them out, and I'll make a big show of how I'm not scared of bees. Seriously, though, I usually don't put my face that close to them, but I do like to reach out near a swarm that I'm going to catch to see how they react. Because under most circumstances, they're not going to pay any attention to your hand. They're not going to fly out at you. They're not going to be, stinging you, basically. But you need to know that before you start messing with them. In this situation, we had a ladder, and the maintenance guy was nice enough to climb up one side of the ladder while I climbed up the other, and he used bolt cutters on this tree branch. If you're really serious about catching swarms, get you some pruning shears and carry them around in your car. Get you a veil and carry them around in your car. And watch your thumb if you're using pruning shears. So the key is to hold it steady so all the bees don't fall off when he finally snaps through that. Now, my videographer complained later. She said that I didn't hold still long enough for her to get focused on the bees. And in this situation, I'm not prepared. I don't have a veil. I don't have any equipment. I don't have a nuke. I have a cardboard box, and that's a great way to catch a swarm. And focus, and I put them in the box. But that was a pretty good swarm, a pretty good sized swarm. And I took them home and put them in a hive, put them on some foundation, and let them get their start. And I don't keep good enough records to tell you how successful they were. From time to time, you'll catch a swarm that doesn't have a queen in it. That's not ideal. But often you can catch them good. If you really want to catch swarms, talk to your local fire department, exterminators in your area, let them know you're interested in it. And it's not a bad way to get started. You can't always count on being able to cut a tree limb off. So if you can't, you know, for instance, I'm not going to cut anything off of this tiny little tree or kill it. But you can put your hive down below it, and one cool thing to do is to put a sheet down, like a old bedcloth down, and then shake them out of the tree. My wife loses interest in this pretty quickly, so pay attention. Now you think, well, that's ridiculous. They're all just going to go back up in the tree. If you get most of the bees in the, there's where she lost interest. If you get most of the bees in the box, then you can close it up, leave the box open, and really the best way to catch any swarm is if you can leave the nuke or the box there until dark, because you're always going to have bees that are flying around, and that gives them a chance to go in there. Now, occasionally you'll do that, and the bees will still be in sort of a swarm mode, and they'll leave, and you'll lose them. But under most circumstances, like I did here, I put the frames back in the box, I closed the box up, and came back, went out and got something to eat, took my wife out to dinner, and then came back after dark, and they were all in there, and they were ready to go home. So that's catching a swarm. Now, what do you do after you take the swarm home and you put them in a hive? And by the way, you just install them just like a package. Just shake them in there. Maybe there's not much point in using smoke on a swarm because they're not defending a hive. They don't have honey to go fill up on, but sugar water is a good thing to use on them like I was here. What do I do when I get home and put them in a hive? What's the one thing I feed them? Very good. You guys are paying attention here. So I'm going to feed that swarm. Now, the book, and Harris Overholt's going to speak tomorrow, and he's going to talk about the next thing in the book, and that is splitting or dividing a colony. That's a little bit advanced, but Harris will touch on it, and you can read about it in the book. It's a good thing to kind of understand, but as a new beekeeper, I don't really want to burden you too much with it, and Harris won't burden you with it a lot either. But there is good information on here about collecting swarms, how to get ready if you want to catch a swarm, and how to take care of those hives after you install them. You'll see a reference on page 26 that when you install your bees, it recommends that you use Fumidil B, and that is a treatment for a gut disease called nosema that you may hear some more about. I think Mike probably touched on it earlier. That's sort of the standard recommendation in here. Not everybody does that, but it's common for installation of packages.